Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what are honestly some of the most famous, and let's be real, probably the most misunderstood teachings in all of human history. Teachings that completely flipped the ancient world upside down. Whether you're deeply familiar with the historical texts of the first century or entirely new to them, we're going to look closely at a profoundly influential speech. It's known as the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to unpack exactly what it meant to its original audience.
Now, you've very likely heard these words from Jesus of Nazareth before. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do to others what you would have them do to you. These simple, yet incredibly profound statements have fundamentally shaped the daily lives of literally billions of people. I mean, they're the absolute bedrock of what we often call the Golden Rule, right? And they originated right here in this specific collection of teachings.
And what's just amazing about the Sermon on the Mount is its sheer density. We're talking about just 3 short chapters, but they are absolutely packed with enduring ideas. It uses this vivid, everyday imagery, things like salt or the universal struggle for money, to make these massive philosophical points. It's the kind of speech that just permanently sticks in your mind. But as you read on, you'll see how this builds. The sermon starts presenting these incredibly challenging instructions that seem to completely defy human nature. Loving an enemy, blessing someone who's actively persecuting you, turning the other cheek. These are radical, paradigm-shifting demands. They literally force a listener to stop and totally reevaluate their entire response to conflict. And, well, it goes even further than that. It contains genuinely puzzling, almost shocking statements that leave listeners completely bewildered. Obviously, an instruction like amputating a hand sounds extreme, and it immediately raises some major red flags. When you hit a line like this, you can't help but ask, what exactly is the speaker trying to communicate here? So how do we actually make sense of all this? Well, to figure out what these teachings truly mean, we're going to break this down into 4 key areas today. God's kingdom, first century Israel, the upside-down kingdom, and finally the beautiful literary design of the text itself. Let's get into it. Part 1. What is God's kingdom? Let's look at the historical context. To really decode these teachings, we have to look back at the Hebrew Bible that Jesus actually grew up reading. According to the ancient Genesis story, humans were originally appointed to rule a well-ordered world. This ideal state, God's kingdom, was a reality where humans governed on God's behalf, using wisdom and love. The whole idea was about bringing heaven's perfect reality of justice, peace, and having enough for everyone right here to earth. But as the story goes, humanity foolishly rebelled. They started building their own empires using their own flawed wisdom. So in response to that, God chose one specific family, the Israelites. Starting with Moses at Mount Sinai, God entered into a sacred covenant with them. He provided his wisdom, which was called the Torah, or the teaching. And the ultimate goal here? To transform them into representatives of God's kingdom, basically showing all the other nations what that original perfect rule was supposed to look like. Part 2. Waiting in the first century. Fast forward to the first century and things are a mess. Society is completely fractured, God's kingdom seemed totally absent, and Israel was suffering terribly under the oppressive thumb of the Roman Empire. So you had all these different leaders scrambling to force the kingdom to arrive in their own way. The Pharisees, they demanded strict obedience to the Torah. The Sadducees decided to just ally with Rome as power brokers. The Zealots became violent freedom fighters taking to the hills. And others, well, they just hid out in the desert entirely, waiting for a cosmic reset. Meanwhile, outside of those extreme factions, you had the vast majority of the population. If you were walking around the hill country of Israel back then, you'd find regular, everyday people just trying to survive. They were poor, they were sick, and they were barely hanging on. A lot of them had their ancestral land completely stolen by Roman occupiers and were being crushed, just completely crushed, by heavy taxation. They were utterly powerless and, honestly, totally hopeless. Which brings us to part 3, an upside-down kingdom arrives. Right into this desperate, heavy reality steps Jesus. And here's the crazy part. He doesn't go to the wealthy or the powerful. No, he gathers these exact, everyday, powerless people onto a hill, and he makes a shocking announcement. He declares that the arrival of God's kingdom is starting here and now, with them. He actually opens his famous sermon with the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit."
This completely flips the world upside down. I mean, naturally, we look for divine blessing and success among the rich, right? Among the influential and the powerful. But Jesus announces the exact opposite. He declares that the upside down blessings of God's kingdom begin exactly where people feel the most defeated, poor, and crushed. It's a real game changer. The kingdom doesn't start from the top down, it starts from the bottom up.
Part 4. The beautiful literary design of the sermon. Now, you might be wondering how all these radical ideas actually tie together. Well, this paradigm-shifting announcement isn't just in the words themselves. It's encoded directly into the literary structure. The medium is literally part of the message. The sermon is meticulously, symmetrically designed. It's divided into 3 overarching parts, with the middle part divided into 3 distinct smaller sections. And like a giant puzzle with a bullseye in the middle, at the very center of that center section sits one singular focusing element. Right at the center of the center is the famous Lord's Prayer. By placing it exactly here, this brilliant literary design beautifully ties together the deep, ancient history of God's kingdom with this new, present reality for the powerless people listening on that hill. It takes this entire sweeping ethical discourse and focuses it into a single plea. Our Father in heaven, may your name be treated as holy. May your kingdom come, may your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. As we wrap up this explainer, we can clearly see that the Sermon on the Mount is so much more than just a list of impossible moral hurdles. When you look at the historical context of that crushing Roman occupation and this highly intentional literary design focusing on heaven coming to earth, it becomes a profound invitation. It's an invitation to those original listeners, and really to anyone reading it today, to actively step up and rule with God's wisdom and love, right in the messy reality where they are. So, I want to leave you with this ultimate challenge based on the text. If this upside-down kingdom truly begins with the poor, the weak, and the persecuted, how does that shift your perspective? How will you choose to view the powerless? And how might you live out these radical teachings to actively bring God's wisdom, justice, and love to the world today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.